rocketing high, and then they had to make a correction. So prices do go up. Medical care is very high in cost. But I think you still have a good point. Why isn't the CPI going up? In the 1970s, I admitted that the CPI was going up at 15%. That means it was a lot more pervasive back then than now. There's two things I think that has happened. One is that money hasn't all stayed here. We spent our money overseas, and the Chinese, were taking that, and they would save that, and they would recycle that, and buy our debt. And the other thing is this new money. Bernanke has more than doubled the money supply, nearly tripled at one time during the crisis last year. That money, it can sit in the banks, but if the banks don't want to loan or people don't want to borrow, you can put a lot of money in the banks, and they refer to pushing on a string. You can push all you want, but if people don't want it and the banks don't want to loan it, it doesn't get out there. So the question is could it stay like that for a long time? We believe that it will stay there for a while, but eventually people will anticipate and say, oh, prices are going back up again, I have to spend, and it will eventually reflect not just in a few things like medical care and education and maybe energy, but everything will start to go up, and then people will have a different attitude. They'll, instead of trying to save their money, they want to get rid of it before it loses its value. But that's what's unpredictable. In Austrian economics, they talk about this, but you can't put a calculator to it or a formula, and you can't have a computer dictate exactly, well, you doubled the money supply today, and we know what's happening tomorrow. We do know the value of money will go down, and it will affect the market in certain ways, but predicting the timing is very difficult.
My guest is Dr. Ron Paul, originally from the Pittsburgh area, grew up in Greentree, went to Dormont High School, a libertarian congressman from Texas, and he walks the walk. Take a short break, and then we're going to ask him about specifically this bill to audit the Fed and how long he's been trying to make this happen and how close he is now to actually achieving that goal. Simply to audit the Fed so we know what they're doing. Dimitri live and dangerously local every Saturday night from 6 to 9 right here. News Radio 1020, KDK.
He's a mild-mannered newspaper columnist by day, but every Saturday night, our hero, Dimitri Vassilaros, becomes live and dangerously local on News Radio 1020 KDKA. No phone booth or tights required.
Don't forget Dimitri Tweeter tonight from 8:30 to 9. Just call in and answer the question, what are you doing? Just don't interact with the host. A very special guest this evening, Dr. Ron Paul. Libertarian. He's a congressman from Texas, officially in the GOP, but Dr. Paul ran for president as a Libertarian Party candidate in 1988. Was that right, Dr. Paul?
Yes, that is correct.
I voted for you, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I was one of them.
Remember, we came in third.
Exactly right. And
we did pretty good.
That we normally do. That's exactly right. So tell me, when did you first introduce this bill to audit the Federal Reserve?
Well, I'm not absolutely positive, but I know I did it in the last time I was in Congress, and I was there from 78 up until 84. So I know in the early 80s I did. I think somebody else looked it up for me, and they said the most I ever had on to support it was about 18 members of Congress. So this is a big difference now. Attitudes have changed, conditions have changed, and all of a sudden I think that we're getting the attention that the Federal Reserve has deserved a long time ago.
So it's been about 30 years. 30 years ago you started introducing this bill.
Right.
And how many co-sponsors do you have now for this bill?
All the Republicans have signed on, and 125 Democrats. So it's like 301, 302, over 300 of it. And that means that, in theory, you could pass this under suspension because you have to have 290 votes to pass it under suspension. That means two-thirds of the Congress support it. But and I think the people who haven't signed on to it would have a hard time voting against it because, the Congress is now very much aware of what the people are saying. The people are upset. They want more transparency. They want more responsibility. They want want to know what's happening to the money. So the people are demanding this about the Federal Reserve. And most of these people signed on not because of me, but because at the grassroots level, and I think our campaign for liberty helped a whole lot, that the people started calling their members of Congress and going to their meetings and these town hall meetings, saying, why aren't you on this bill? And they felt it was in their political interest to get on the bill. So in a way, it proves the system can work. When the people really become outraged and get involved and demand something be done, they will respond in Washington. That said, though, we still have a ways to go to prove this point. At least we're getting the members of Congress demanding it now. The big question is whether we can overcome the obstacles being placed in front of us by the establishment, and it's very powerful. You know, there's a lot of people who benefit from this. The banks, the big corporations, and the governments, and, you know, it's a big deal. So it remains to be seen.
Do you think these co-sponsors are serious about it? Because if they were serious, there'd be some sort of vote by now, I would think. Or are they just co-sponsors now to avoid the heat?
I think there's a little bit of each, but even the average Democrat, being in the majority party, wouldn't have a whole lot to say. You know, if you have Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer against this and Obama against it, it's not going to happen, and they will be hearing about how the end of the world would come if this would happen. If the Federal Reserve was exposed, I mean, it would just be horrendous, you know, and it would be a meltdown, and you can't do it. And I'm sure that's what they're hearing right now, because that's what we hear from the Federal Reserve. You know, this would be just too much, letting the people know exactly what we're doing. So far they haven't responded by wanting to bring this up. Barney Frank, though, who's the chairman of Financial Services, and I've known him for a good many years, the best I can tell, he's pretty much up front with me, and he's, you know, his plan isn't my plan, because I wanted to come up as a single bill, but he said that he would put it on the major reform package, which will have a lot of bad things on it, and that may happen. But there are some in the Congress now some Democrats are putting pressure on me now to water it down, which I have no intention of doing. So we have a little ways to go, but I think in the next month or so we'll see how this works out. But you know what? If we do get it passed, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. It's going to be years probably before we ever get to the bottom of it. But the most important thing has already been accomplished, and that is getting the American people's attention on the real problem in monetary and financial affairs, and that's the Federal Reserve. So even if they're allowed to go through and stop it in the courts have never been favorable to sound money. They always benefit the government and the big banks. So if they either stop the bill or they stop it in the courts, it'll just prove our point. What do they have to hide? What is so important? They can't tell us what kind of transactions, what kind of deals they make with other central banks, what kind of things they do with other governments, international financial institutions. What have they done with all the corporations in this country? Who have they bailed out, and why and when? They don't want us to know that, and that is what is becoming apparent to so many Americans right now, and very suspect. Now, if the dollar goes way down, like I suspect it will, then there's going to be even louder noise about monetary reform, and it'll be an absolute necessity to reform the system, because even though there's been trust